So we're going to start off by taking a minute to thank you guys for joining us and to thank our sponsors, the people who helped make this virtual conference happen. That would be HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Sourcebooks, Blackstone Publishing, Scholastic, and Penguin Random House. And another big shout out to Eileen from NABA and Linda Marie from SIBA, who worked tirelessly to convert the fall conferences to virtual. And I think it's been, from what I've attended so far, a real success. And it was no small amount of work. So like, yay. Thank you guys so much for doing that. Some housekeeping reminders. We are abiding by the conference's code of conduct, which I'll paste into the chat in just a minute because I can't multitask at 4:30. A reminder also that according to the rules, we are all considered competitors, and I don't think it'll come up on this session, but no discussion of terms or boycotts. If you haven't yet, if you want to add your store name, to like rename yourself with your name and your store name, that might be helpful for people for context. And then a couple of other things, if you know how to navigate to where you can raise hands and see the chat has been pretty lively at the sessions I've been attending, and I found it really helpful to ask questions there and see the comments there. So it's a really good engagement spot. So I would recommend that you open that up. And we're gonna try, I think, to like use the raise hand function when we have questions, and we'll see how that works. In general, this session is for you guys. So if you want us to talk more about certain things, you want to talk about certain things, that's great. We can talk a little bit about like how the genesis of us creating our handbooks, why you might have a handbook. We want to find out from you guys like who all has a handbook and who doesn't yet. And just like the kind of the whole process and the reasons for having one. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself and add anything?
Hey, I'm Rachel Watkins, and I'm the Events and Operations Director at Avid Bookshop. And I think we did not have a handbook for the first like 6 or 7 years. So if you're here, don't feel sheepish, because we just flew by the seat of our pants. So I don't want you to feel awkward. I also think that if you want to open up your handbook on your computer and kind of look at things, that might be a really good way to engage and kind of spot check from our agenda I posted in the chat.
Sorry, I was just typing a message. If anybody's microphones are not working, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll keep an eye on the chat also. So I don't know how to do this well. I'm not tech savvy on Zoom yet, but how many people have a handbook and how? Maybe like half. Some people are like this. They're like, I kind of have a handbook. We didn't have one. We had like, we created like a real version of a handbook like maybe 2 years ago, and then spent this past year really creating a more robust one. You don't really need one until you need one. So, and then you don't really create one until after you need one. Yeah. Few pages of policies that we don't look at much. Yeah, that sounds, yeah. Google Doc process, some documents, but not an official. Yeah. I think this, like, I don't know what it was like for you, Rachel, from 2005. Yeah. Like starting it was the hardest part because it's such a big project that like we got overwhelmed with where to even begin. But then once we finally did start, it kind of propelled itself forward. What was it like for you?
Yeah, that's totally it. Shout out to SIBA. The first thing I did was reach out to SIBA, to Linda Marie, and say, help, and crowdsource it, ask your bookseller friends. Linda Marie was a former manager of Malaprops, and with permission, she said, go to Malaprops, see if they'll share. And that's what they did. Hat tip to Malaprops. They gave us their handbook. We were already, bookshop buddies. And so this was a way they mentored us. And they said, copy and paste it if you need to, but just, tell people you got it from us. And that's what I have done. They had paid for a lawyer to vet it. So what I did get from them had been vetted by an attorney. So the first thing is ask your buddies, because someone may be able to help.
Yeah, ours was lawyer vetted also, but it's interesting because Rachel and I, before this, we were like we showed each other our handbooks, and there's so many things that are like city, state, town specific laws or rules. And so, if you're sharing and crowdsourcing handbooks with a store that's not in your area, just remember that some things might not apply, especially if it's like the legal side of things. And every store has like slightly different policies. We put together the outline, which Rachel put a link to a Google Doc of in the chat, and I think she emailed it out yesterday. That outline we created, like basically comparing and contrasting Avid's handbook and Greenlight's handbook. Maybe not exactly in this order, but if you're trying to figure out like where to start on a handbook or what sections to make sure, topics to consider including or to make sure to include, the things that we included in the outline. And every store has different versions and different rules and policies, but these are the things that our handbooks overlapped on topically. What the rules were at each store was different. The pay schedule or how we manage our timekeeping, but the fact that they were addressed was consistent. So maybe that'll help if you are trying to figure out like what to make sure you include. A lot of people seem like they have like in process Google Docs.
Yeah, I will also say something that Rebecca and I both realized we are in the process of doing is adding inclusionary language to address, BIPOC sensitivity, including everyone. And so that's a process that you can't just like cut and paste. So we want to do it mindfully. And so I'm sure you guys have been talking about how you need to,
Yeah, I was so relieved when Rachel and I were talking that to hear that we were not the only people who were like, oh, we have to revisit our handbook and look at it through a different lens, because we were realizing, we worked very, very hard to create this handbook, and then we released it to our staff, and then we immediately realized that the way that it was phrased didn't, like, it left certain things too open to interpretation or to the potential of bias or to like customer service policies or a theft policy, unruly behavior policy was like a little too subjective. And that leaves the door open for bias and racism. And so we are now also in the process of going through and rewriting whole sections of our handbook to make sure that it's looked at through the lens of being intentionally and specifically anti-bias and anti-racist. I want to address one of the questions in the chat because it's a really good one from Judith. Is it mandatory to have a lawyer vet your handbook? It is not mandatory to, but if done right, a handbook protects both you as the employer and your employee, because it makes it clear what the rules are for everybody to abide by. And you do want to make sure that it is as accurate as possible, because that could come back to bite you down the line. And you don't have to have a lawyer vet it if you have other ways of making sure that you're getting accurate confirmation that the laws that you're including are correct. We had ours vetted, and then the sections that we're changing are not the legal sections. They're like the personal store inflection and store style sections. So we feel okay about that.
Yeah, let me address Mindy's question in the chat and start by saying we operated for 6 or 7 years without a handbook. And when we opened up a second store, all of a sudden we realized we really needed to bump things up a notch. And when we did release the handbook, it stressed out our people. Janet remembers, she's on this call. They really became anxious for no reason as far as I'm concerned, but it was like all of a sudden we're putting in writing things that they'd already been abiding by. So be real conscious of your people's mental health and try to remind them this is for their protection and ours. It's not like a management top-down thing. It shouldn't be conveyed that way. I've seen different things. Rebecca has them sign the handbook. We have them sign it, but then also my dad's an attorney. We have them initial each page at the bottom. Maybe we'll take that out if that, I've been thinking, Janet, do we want to edit that and not have each page because it feels like you're buying a car? So that answers that question. Just be cognizant that they're going to be a little anxious.
Yeah, when we rolled out our handbook, it's interesting because hearing Rachel talk about it, it was like a little bit different on our end. Our staff was relieved because they felt like our organization of policies and procedures and rules was kind of scattershot all over the place, and it's because it was, and the handbook consolidated the information into one place and made it a cohesive document so that they knew where to go for information, like how do I call out sick, how do I request time off, what are the policies of vacation leave, a break leave, break time, they could reference one place instead of not knowing where to look. And so they were relieved, but they did push back on the customer service and the ways that we addressed theft. And so listening to them and incorporating their feedback into our revisions has been important.
And a handbook is not a policy and procedures manual. That's something really different. Our policies and procedures talks about how to do the New York Times reporting list every week, just the minutia of our POS system. And so that shouldn't be in a handbook. Yeah. How often do you update it? You should do it at least once a year, right? Do I do that? No, I need to start. Rebecca, how often do you update?
So, I mean, we like right before the pandemic, we were like actively meeting with the lawyer to go through the finalizing the steps. And then it got put on hold for a while. And we actually like finished it a few months ago and then immediately now need to revise it. But what we had set out to do was basically like release it into the world. And then we use Basecamp for project management software. We were like, schedule ourselves like a year from now, review the handbook, and I think that we were timing it to be reviewed and updated in advance of, like, we do annual reviews and raises all in the spring. No matter when somebody was hired, they get put onto that schedule. And so we were like, we'll review, revise, and update any changes to the handbook in advance of review season. And then if there are any changes, this is what we were thinking, we would have them receive a new copy and sign a new copy. So that was the theory. We'll see. But then got in the way.
We have had them sign the question in the chat. How do you have them sign it? We have them sign it and then return it back to us. But I'm wondering about doing electronic signatures next time to kind of cut down on paper. I also want to piggyback what Rebecca said about her spring reviews. One thing that is outlined in our handbook, and I was trying to see where it would be here, under employee feedback for HR related, we very specifically spelled out how you are going to get corrected. So let's say you're not using the closing checklist. So in our handbook, we say this is the procedure, so everybody will know what will happen. You're going to get an email that says, hey, Ronnie, you haven't been using and so we specifically, kind of like people want to know expectations. We tell them the first time you'll get an email, the second time we'll ask for a meeting, and the third time, if you're still not doing what we need you to do and you were hired to do, you may be terminated. Now, that's never happened, and it's really gotten to that point, but it's nice to have procedures in there. It may seem kind of silly to have it super spelled out, but it makes people feel good to have as much information as possible.
I thought compliments to your handbook. I thought that section was really good. We don't have it spelled out to that degree. We have a section about what the complaint procedure is for if an employee wants to bring a complaint forward, but we didn't have a section explaining what our process of I don't want to use the word discipline because that's not what I'm trying. Like, what's the softer word? But
mid-course corrections on their.
Yeah. Yeah, but we didn't have that like the documentation listed in there, and I thought it was very smart. Yeah.
And you're also in the process of taking some things out, right, Rebecca, that you had originally?
We had,
Um,
we had originally included an anti-theft policy for how we navigate shoplifters and potential shoplifters, and rereading it through the lens of racism and bias, we were like, wow, it is there's way too much that's open to interpretation, and way too much that uh, creates more problems than it prevents. And so we are removing it entirely and rewriting it, uh, um, like we're just writing it out. Yeah. Same with the way that we address unruly behavior. And it used to be, not that we've ever called the police on anybody, but like it used to be like, call the police if this happens. And now it's like, call these interventionary steps and only call the police if there's like a cataclysmic disaster, and all of that was at the specific feedback of our staff, who was understandably concerned and upset about like why, like, what happens when you call the NYPD. So we wanted to be sensitive to our staff, but also to like what the right way to navigate events that happen in the store are, and it's like, it's so rare that, like, we never really had to like test those things in the moment, because thankfully reasons to call the police don't come up very often, but you have the handbook and the policies and the procedures there, so that if it ever does come up, you have something to look to. It's like it covers like the worst case scenarios in about those kinds of things.
Yeah, good discussion in the chat.
Yeah.
Janet or Hannah, do y'all want to jump in and talk, or are you good? This is y'all's session if you want.
Yeah, we should not be doing all of the talking.
But I like when you guys do all the talking.
I will say another difference is that when we wrote it, we had two couples. We had four employees who were dating, the two of them. And I wasn't comfortable putting in the personal relationship portion because that would feel yucky. And so you have it though.
We've had like multiple marriages come and long-term relationships come out of our staff. And so we were really hesitant to put it in there too. But at the advice of the labor lawyer, and this is the part that it took us a long time to wrap our heads around, because we're like earnest and literal people, because we're book people, right? So they said that the labor lawyer said that including it is different than enforcing it. And as long as if you ever have a reason to need to have something to fall back on. And so we pushed back on like for the personal relationships. He wanted the labor lawyer wanted the language to be a lot stronger and more clear cut. And we were like, no, but we want to leave room for love. We wanted to leave the possibility that, but at the same time, we had as we were working on the handbook, we had a scenario where there was somebody in a supervisory role in a new relationship with a frontline bookseller, and we were like, wow, if this goes south, that's going to be awkward, because they're in a reporting dynamic. So we decided that they just need to disclose it, and then we're just going to figure it out from there and hope that everything was great. So
any other specific questions, y'all? Like, do you have a violence weapons section in y'all's?
We definitely had a violence and disruptions, kind of like outsized things happening in the store section, but not a weapons one. Maybe we should. It's a good question about the handbook from scratch, or start with a template. What did you guys do? Rachel, you started from another store's version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to my SEBA trade organization, and they were like, check out malaprops. So we started with malaprops, and one thing malaprops has is this gorgeous history, and we don't have our history in ours. You have a great history in yours, Rebecca.
A little one, yeah. We thought about including the history because, for a new hire, the handbook is like sometimes the the first thing that they have to take away that gives them context for the store. So they should, give them an opportunity to know a little bit about the store. And I forgot I was going to say something else. Oh, so I haven't looked at them, but I have heard that QuickBooks and a lot of like payroll services will have a template that you can start from, that you might want to look into if you use a payroll service, if they have anything like that. We didn't start from a template. We looked at a lot of other stores' handbooks and then pulled together the things that we had scattershot, like rules over here, rules over there, and put them all in a bucket. And our first version was so gangly, and it was like an awkward teenager. I mean, it was really bad. And then like 6 months later, we re-looked at it and reorganized everything, and it turned into like a swan. It was really like the first version was really looking back, I was like, oh god. But at least it like covered all of the things, like it put all the things in one area that we needed to include, and then we were able to organize it better. If you're trying to figure out how to start, ADP has a template, yeah. If you're trying to figure out where to start, and if you don't have access to a template, the outline that we shared, you could put this in a different order. Avid's handbook and our handbook address these topics in different areas of their handbook. And you could put them in the order that was important to you, but you could like use it as a checklist for the things to make sure you're including. For Leah's question about would we be willing to share handbooks, I would be happy to if we weren't in the middle of rewriting one part that I now am like embarrassed of. So it's like a tricky timing.
I'm trying to keep track of the chats to go back to what we haven't discussed yet.
Rachel or Rebecca, as you have already written yours, was there one or two subjects or items that you found, oh my God, how could we have forgotten this? Or just that you didn't include in the beginning, and again, when a situation came up or as you went over and over it, you thought, maybe we should add this. Was there something that just stuck out that was pretty important, but, it's not obvious to us, to include it?
Not for us. The changes that we've made, beside the diversity and inclusion that we're working on, were very nitty gritty. Like putting in our verbiage for paid time off, because we didn't have that at first. So I can't, the model I got from Malaprops was pretty inclusive.
Yeah, the two things I'll add to that, the lawyer put in a lot of legalese that I was like, I had no idea there was like voting leave law. Like I had no idea, there was like things that like are included in the legalese that we just never even knew about as employers, which is embarrassing. And the other thing that's also really embarrassing is because we're like retailers and professionals, right? We didn't have a customer service section. We had a theft section. This is like horrible, and it's like a confession. We had a theft policy, but we didn't have customer service in our handbook. And we tend to like, our flaw as a business is like, or one of our many flaws is that we tend to be very procedural. We like a document, we like rules, we like order, structure, and sometimes we can forget to include the context and the tone and the soft edges, which customer service is a big part of. Yeah.
Oh, I will say the interpersonal conflict reporting is important. We have a small section that says, it's tiny, all Avid Bookshop employees must report all interpersonal conflicts with either peers, supervisors, or staff members they supervise that they deem to be a serious nature to the management. And of course, having that in there doesn't mean they're going to do it, but we have one-on-one check-ins every 3 to 4 months with each of our employees. And we have an ongoing document for each employee where we make notes. It might be so-and-so seems kind of down, just simple things. And then 2 weeks later, you find out that person's mom has died of cancer. Or we say, oh, they forgot the checklist, again. And so at those check-ins, I will say to them, I'm kind of getting off topic, but I really like this. I will say, what are the problems and issues that you're dealing with every day at work that affects work? And more often than not, in the last 5 minutes of the 30-minute check-in, as they're leaving, they'll be like, I dread working with Rachel. When I see her on the schedule, I don't want to be there. And then you're like, why? It's because Rachel's not doing what she was supposed to be doing. So try to document the interpersonal stuff too. You'll figure out a puzzle of how your staff work together if you do that. And I know it takes a lot of time, but we use Basecamp, and I just pop on Basecamp, write a few notes, and the management sees that. So it's kind of a living document of PR, HR.
We are working actively towards having that kind of a structure. In the chat, do you have a training manual in addition to your employee handbook? Yes. Training procedures, store rules, like what like how you use your point of sale system and how you do your restocks and stuff like that. Those are training tools, not handbook. There's like two separate documents, and we should just always keep them separate. We can talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of changing policies that could impact BIPOC staff, customers, and members. Let's come back to that for just a second. I just want to look at the rest of the questions because that's like a big topic. The manual, so everyone, manuals make things a little more consistent, and I think that's important because I think if you have consistent rules, then they're more likely to be fairly across the board. And actually, like a lot of potential for bias comes through things being rules being inconsistently applied. I think that's an important thing to remember. What is Basecamp is our project management software. It's like Slack and Asana and stuff. It's just the version that we both happen to use. So Rachel, we should talk more about anti-bias and anti-racist approach through our handbook, because that's something that people have asked about.
Yeah, and I'm trying to pull up my notes right now of all these notes that I've been, because as I have attended training through ABA and SEBA, I've been making notes in Basecamp for Janet and Luis and I to look. Quite a real simple change that we did months ago is copy and replace. I think we used the her and she for all the pronouns, and we just copied and pasted he, she, they. So that was the first kind of inclusionary thing we did. But let me see if I can quickly go to Basecamp and find my notes about editing.
And while there's a question. Do you put store policies in the employee handbook?
Yeah, I was about to get to that while Rachel's looking her thing up. So we separate out store policies from the handbook. The handbook is like the laws and rules and like when you show up for work, what you are allowed to wear and not wear to work, how you clock in and clock out, how you get paid, how you are scheduled, like the rules. And then the store policies, like, do senior citizens get a discount, things like that. Those are organized differently for us. And like the labor lawyer recommended that, like we did that instinctually, and then the labor lawyer recommended that we keep them very separate.
So we're looking at things like how to have courageous conversations with people, looking at institutional assessment of our policies. Like it's really, really complicated, and literally we haven't started it. I've just been making notes of things that we're supposed to do. You can do a racial equity impact analysis to see what's going on. Let's see, I got to change glasses. Who are the racial ethnic groups affected by this particular policy decision, and are they at the table? These are just a few points. How will the policy practice decision affect each group? How will this policy practice decision be perceived by each group? Does the policy practice decision ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? So you kind of, I mean, this is really complicated. This is, it's tiny print, so I can't really read it. But that's an example of things that we need to do before we add verbiage into our handbook to address this. Does anybody else have any experience or thoughts about a racial equity impact analysis? I will look, Angela's, I know I'm reading fast. I'll look for notes about that so that I can send as a follow-up to y'all.
If anyone else uses ADP, I know some people were saying they had a template for the handbook, the actual handbook to use. We had a operations manual, and then we took ADP's handbook and made it into something a little bit more accurate for what we are, and they're in the process of reviewing it to see if I made it illegitimate editing it for book selling. But also, someone said, what is ADP? It's a HR payroll company. So it's like Paychex or ADP, all of those companies to help with payroll.
Yeah, I think that like it's a common resource that if you have a payroll service like Paychex or ADP, that
they should be offering that to you.
They will have a template that you can
with all the laws from that county or state in there, so you don't have to deal with it. But they also, ADP just offered particularly, and I don't know if this was our region or something, but they offered in particular for some training sessions with racial equity, as well as saying that was going to be part of their review when they go through your book, because they also will review your handbook for you every year. So great. I will be taking advantage of that, because since we list like that we prefer BIPOC candidates, and that it can get into some HR situations to begin with. So we have to be careful about how we phrase all that.
There's so many lenses to look at things through. And, like I was saying before, we tend to be very procedural in the first lens that we look at things through. And then we have to take some steps back and come back to it and look at it through a more human lens. And then, when we did this third round of looking back at our handbook, we're now looking at it through a bias and racism lens, and seeing the glaring places that there were potential for bias either within our organization or racism within our organization, or as in our customer facing policies and procedures. And so we're now looking at everything through the lens of making sure that the language, you can't ever remove all racism and bias from the world, but you can mitigate it and you can minimize it. And so if we can set our staff up with a handbook that gives them a roadmap that gives them the least opportunity within our structure for potential bias, implicit or otherwise, then we're setting ourselves and our employees up for more success.
So there's a question, would you have your staff review the completed info for their input?
Our current revision is based on their feedback. So yeah. Yeah.
And I think somebody asked a question ages ago about, do you need a handbook if you're only 2 people? And an honest answer is, if there were only 2 people, I don't think I'd have the time to do a handbook. So we
went for many years without having one. And then of course we were long overdue for having one by the time we made one, which I think is normal for everybody. Yeah. I think that the number of employees where you feel like you will need one will probably vary from store to store and business to business.
Yeah, and regarding the training manual, Janet, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have a specific training manual. We use the policies and procedure living document as that. We have certain things that we do in training that's all in Basecamp and to-dos for each new employee. But our policies and procedures, our procedures manual, not policies, our procedures manual kind of is used as a training manual.
Yeah, we're actually very similar. Yeah.
Oh, and that passport, I forgot, Janet. So we steal the passport from uh, uh we stole it from another. Do you remember? They're in the West Coast. She's typing. Yeah, there's this cute little training manual. You can't remember. And you kind of go through and check it off like a passport. Malaprops does that too. That's kind of cute. We haven't done that in a while, Janet.
Lori is adding that Sure Payroll also has many helpful HR resources that she hadn't seen before. So everybody that should be encouraged to look at their payroll services resources, because I think it's all at our fingertips if we look for it.
We use Homebase for clocking in and clocking out, and I know they have some HR resources that we haven't looked at. So,
and we use Humanity for our timekeeping, and they also have similar resources. There's a lot of resources out there. It's also sometimes it's hard because it's like, finding the time to pull all of the things together. I think for us, it was like we had to carve out some initial front load the work of pulling all the info together into one place, and then it became less unwieldy. You guys have other questions?
Specific way for clocking in and out.
We use a timekeeping software, but we also we have multiple locations and enough employees that it's too we used to do it more manually, and then once we reached a certain size, it became too big. A lot of people use Homebase. You use Homebase, Rachel, right?
I do, and I really like it. I do events, so it's so easy for me to pop in and put events on the schedule using Homebase.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah. Oh, it's really nice for also trading shifts. An employee needs someone to cover the shifts, and Homebase is really easy with that.
Homebase has got good varieties for different sizes of business. Hannah is adding.
Yeah, you make the schedule on Homebase too, and it's really, once you learn it, it's really pretty, and you can kind of see how things work, and I think it's kind of cool. Our operations manager, Luis, builds the schedule through Homebase, and we try to put our schedule out a month in advance at least. Of course, we're closed to the browsing public since mid-March and have no desire to open, so our world is really different. So we haven't really made it. We've got our set schedule now for people fulfilling web orders. So yeah, the color coding is great on Homebase. I don't want to just waste y'all's time. What else could we talk about?
I have one minor thing. It's Mindy. Do you just have an addendum? I think that's the right word. Instead of changing the whole manual, do you just put a sheet of paper in with the specific change?
That's what we did when we added some benefits that we needed to put in. We did add an addendum so we didn't have to reprint the whole thing.
And that's legal enough?
I believe so. It felt legal enough.
Okay.
We are revising the body of the handbook, but we also hadn't the timing of all of the things with the pandemic and the shutdown. We were on track to have everybody receive a copy at their reviews and sign it, and that process never happened because then everybody was virtual for a while. I do think that we probably need to figure out a virtual signature of the handbook going forward. Less paper, and also not everybody is in some people who are just going to permanently work remotely. But there's like subscription services you can sign up for that are e-signature things.
And
Yeah,
there's another question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're
Smaller
good.
Stores. For smaller stores, what parts of the larger manuals can you exclude, or should we keep everything? That's a good question.
Ours is 18 pages and Rebecca's is like 36. So, and we all have all of the same stuff in it. So that's interesting, right?
We're wordy. I think I'm trying to think like what, looking back over the outline, which is all, like I said before, the things that our two handbooks overlapped on topically. I'm not sure in here like what I would exclude based on the size of a store. You know, like the thing, I think it would, like a lot of it would still apply, you know, how you handle holidays and weather and vacation, timekeeping, how you get paid, scheduling, attendance, overtime breaks, dress conduct,
Yeah.
customer service, how, like what your compute, this part like was like, hadn't occurred to us to include like what your social media and computer use policies are, what, you know, when you can and can't speak on behalf with the voice of the store, sexual harassment, health insurance rules, harassment in general, employee feedback. Oh, we do have employee feedback, positive review process and negative disciplinary, weapons, drug and alcohol policy, which we also hadn't occurred to us to include, relationship, solicitation, confidentiality. You know, I don't know what in there I would take out. I mean, and maybe it would be like a personal decision in there, because not all of those are legally required to include, you know?
Yeah, look at the question about ethics.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, we didn't specifically call it ethics. That's a good question. I think for us, it gets included in code of conduct and in the language that we use for how people treat each other in conduct ways, you know, employee facing and customer facing. I like the Hannah's comment at, it keeps moving. Before having a store, I worked at several stores of various sizes, and the real handbook would have made my life as an employee significantly better. If things are written down, you know someone has thought about them, and when feeling vulnerable, just knowing that helps. Yeah. I think we all work and function better when we know what the rules are.
We're approaching 5:15. Any last questions or thoughts from anyone?
Hannah, thank you for including that from the employee's perspective. I think it's important to remember that it's for you as the employer, but also for the employees. It's for both parties. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, email me at rachel@avidbookshop.com if you have specific questions. I'm happy to help because I had so much help when I did this, so I want to pay it forward.
Same. I'm happy to have you email Rachel. No. You're welcome to email me also. It's Rebecca@greenlightbookstore.com. I might be slower to respond than she, but happy to talk to people. This has been like my pet project for a couple of years now. So cool. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your New Voices, New Room sessions.